Let's start off here on page 45. We see the confusion that's taking place, and notice on page 44 there it says that they suffer in their bodies, okay? Because of the fact of what's taking place in this world, they are suffering with their bodies. They're suffering from the confusion and everything that's taking place. Notice that it says confusion. They stress the truth that shows you why mankind is suffering confusion of the mind in this time period. Of course, they always stretch the truth. They never tell the truth to begin with, but you know, they're always trying to justify themselves rather than here it is. Rather than actually, okay, so they stress the truth. Leviticus 18:23. He says, neither shall you have sexual relations with animals and defile yourself along with it. Neither shall any woman present herself to have sexual relations with an animal. It is confusion and perversion. Of course it is, because of the fact that what it does to the minds of a person, it just totally corrupts a person. And of course it corrupts the animal. Remember, if that was done, the animal itself was put to death, as well as the person, because you had to get rid of that confusion. Because of course, see, the thing is when one person sins, as the scripture says, it passes on to someone else, to someone else, to someone else, and that's exactly what takes place when that's done. So all it does is just causes total confusion in a person's mind, and of course that's passed on to their genes, and of course it's passed on to the genetic makeup of a person, and then the next person will receive it, and the next person. That's the reason why we're so screwed up in this world today, is because sins of the forefathers have ended up corrupting us, and these are the things that we have to overcome and actually fight to get out of our system. And I have no earthly idea where that is at. But the animal itself also had to be destroyed, because it could not continue to live, because otherwise, you know, the animal itself, just like the humans messed up, well, the animal kingdom would be messed up as well. So Leviticus 18 here, you see in verse 20, 22 to 25, 27, and 30, this tells you not to defile yourself in that way, because it's confusion and perversion. And you look at the top of the page, it says, verse 20 shows the confusion and perversion begin with the illegal sex acts from uncontrolled lust. In Leviticus 27, we see the word land. Now remember, the Hebrew word translated land also means firmament. And the firmament is made up of micro-transparent kingdoms that make up the space called the atmosphere that surrounds the earth. The defilement, of course, has reached into the heavens, and her sins have brought forth that religion, and Satan did a really great job. You know, she really did. She did exactly what Yahweh wanted her to do. And by doing that, of course, she opened up a world that just will destroy everything. And if mankind was allowed, of course, to go on in that manner, he would destroy himself completely, because of the confusion and perversion that's gotten to this whole world. And so these things are reaching up into the heavens, which shows the fact that, remember how the scripture says that the land would vomit you out, you know, would get rid of it. Well, the earth is trying to get rid of these things, and so therefore these sins, the curses, are going up to the heavens. In Leviticus, it says, the defilement has reached into the heavens. Her sins, sin brought forth by religious teachings, have reached into the heavens, and her sins are causing confusion on earth, and in the heavens are the firmament. Leviticus 18:23 says, neither shall you have sexual relations with any animal and defile yourself along with it. So you notice, you're defiling the animal and it defiles the person itself. Neither should any woman do the same, because of course that defiles her, and it causes confusion of the mind and confusion of the body itself. Because remember, your mind works with your body, and your body works with your mind. So you've got to have a clear, healthy mind, and this is the reason why we do cleanses. And if you notice, when you do cleanses as well, you're helping your mind think and react to the ways in which it should, instead of there being just total confusion. So we see here, notice the word confusion. Confusion in the minds of those who kill people with guns and nuclear bombs. That's the reason why they react in the way that they do. But the people think that the only solution is to kill them. Get rid of them. They should rot in hell, right? Throw them in prison and just let them rot. Or put them to death on death row. They don't think about how this stuff comes about and what could cause it and what they could do to actually prevent these things from taking place. So there's a solution, but they haven't been taught that solution, and that's our job. The same confusion is reaching to the heavens. The bacteria that is supposed to form drops now bring drought. Drought is one of the plagues that this rebellious world has begun to see and to suffer from. So we see here in this box the plagues. The three things that the world will suffer from this time period is called the last generation by the Savior, or one, confusion of nations and kingdoms, and that's why they're going to rise up against one another. Confusion in the firmament, that's causing drought, which will result in a lack of food or famine. And he also said that there would be famines in Matthew 24, verse 7. And also confusion of the mind from the STDs that's leading to disease epidemics. Matthew 24, verse 7. That there would be pestilence and disease epidemics. Okay, so her sins have reached the plagues, and they have reached into the heavens. It says, I urge you to closely study the information presented in our literature as well as in sermons. And notice, the inspired writings of Yahweh's prophets prove themselves true. Okay? And when you think about that, Yahweh works in ways in which he would, to the inspiration, when you think about that, it's just so amazing when you think about the prophets, how the prophets were, had their minds opened and Yahweh would work with them and cause them to think of these things. These things would actually enter into their mind. They would have such a strong desire, that they would write these things, or they would go out and they would prophesy to people or king and so forth. I mean, can you imagine sometime, getting up there and facing a king, and standing right up to him and just telling them the way it is, that takes, like the world says it takes a lot of guts, but you see with Yahweh, it's actually, his inspiration to where he's just opening their minds and telling them to bring these things forth, because remember, it's all part of Yahweh's plan, and it has to go along with that plan. And certain things had to be warned. Sometimes people would take the warning, of course, and sometimes they wouldn't. The majority of the times you see where it says, Yahweh said prophet after prophet after prophet. And Yeshua even gave the parable and said how that they would not receive what was given unto them. Well, the plagues were the plagues they foretold of or here. The causes of the plagues pointed out in the prophets' writings have increased, just as they foretold. Confused minds have also increased due to the increase of iniquity, which was also prophesied. And notice 2 Timothy 3, verses 1 through 8. It says, I know this also, that in the last days, so he's pointing out a certain time period, he says, perilous times will come. Men will be lovers, and then now he tells you the things that are going to take place and what's going to make it a perilous time. Men will be lovers of themselves. There will be covetousness, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy. And of course, if we see any of these things within us, we have to examine ourselves and get rid of it. Get it under control, right? Without natural affection, truce breakers, unforgiving, false accusers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of those who are righteous, traitors, betrayers, headstrong, arrogant, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of Yahweh, having a form of holiness, but denying the authority of it, from such turn away. Now, in Isaiah 65:5, it talks about, where it says, get away from me, for I am holier than you. Okay, talking about the priests who, sacrifices the swine and so forth and feeds the people these things. They say, I'm holier than you. Back off, For they are the sort who creep into the houses of Yahweh and lead away silly women who are loaded down with sins, captured by various lusts. And the silly women are not talking about women. It's talking about men and women. It's talking about saints, the saints of Yahweh, who become deceived and listen to this, doctrine and get swept like the ship on the wind with every wind of doctrine, and then they leave the house of Yahweh. Always learning, but never able to come to the knowledge of the truth, notice. And sometimes that's the way some people are. They learn things, but they're never able to come to the knowledge of understanding and accept the truth. Sometimes you may talk with people and they'll agree with what you say, but they don't have the mind. They don't have remember, Yahweh has to call a person and open their minds for them to understand those things. Now it's Ines and Ambrose oppose Moshe, so also do these men oppose the truth. Men of corrupt minds reprobate concerning the faith. Remember, those were the Egyptian magicians that opposed Moshe. Now notice verse 8. It says, corrupt minds. Again, we're shown in the last days that Yeshua said in Matthew 24, the last generation, of course, and that's what he says in Matthew 24, verse 3, 12, 33 and 34, he says, now he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately saying, tell us, when will these things be? What will the sign of your coming and the end of the age? What's going to cause this to come about, and when will this be? Now you can imagine the disciples were, inquiring of these things, wondering what's going to take place. And of course we would be too, because, when you think about, here's your teacher, and you're wondering about these things because, they thought, many times they thought that they would be able to, see these things take place in their lifetime, but it wasn't for them. Remember, all these things were written down, like it says in 1 Corinthians, all these things were written down for us in these last days. It wasn't written down for anybody else. I cannot find that. Where is that? Oh, well. Okay, no man can foretell the future, yet Yahweh's prophets did thousands of years ago. Think about it. No man can tell the future. You can't say what's going to take place, 5 minutes from now. You have no idea. But when Yahweh's inspiration comes and inspires a person's mind, he literally puts that into the person's mind, and then they take that and they can prophesy and tell you what's going to take place. And they will wrote these things down. If you remember, like the prophet, I think it was Jeremiah, who wrote things, and then he took his writings and destroyed them, and then he wrote them again, and his servant saved them and made sure that nothing took place to them. And so Yahweh made these different ways so that we could be able to have what we need. Okay, so realizing all of these things, that what Yahweh says is true, right? He inspired his prophets to write these things down, and we see them coming to pass. Now, to get this understanding here about global warming, this is important. See? The real cause of global warming. Okay. That's what we're into right now. Y'all awake? Huh? Okay, the protective shield, notice, designed by Yahweh. This is the protective shield by Yahweh. This is the ozone layer here. It says the ozone layer on our ozonosphere layer, which is very rarely used, is a part of the Earth's atmosphere, which contains relatively high concentrations of ozone, which is O3. Relatively high means a few parts per million, and that's the way they measure things in the atmosphere. It's a few parts per million. It's really more than that, but that's all that they can detect. Remember, man can't see, and man doesn't have even, and they even say in these articles, they really don't know what's out there, what's in the air, because they only know so much. But a few parts per million is what they can figure out. Much higher than the concentration in the lower atmosphere, but still small compared to the main components of the atmosphere. It's mainly located in the lower portion of the stratosphere, from approximately 15 kilometers to 35 kilometers, which is approximately 9 to 28 miles high. Okay, that's the part of the stratosphere there. Above the Earth's surface, through the thickness varies seasonally and geographically. So throughout the different seasons, and depending upon where you're on the Earth, it varies as far as the thickness. But the ozone layer was discovered in 1913. Okay, let's go on down here. It talks about the Dobson unit, which is a unit by which they are able to figure out what's in a certain portion of the air, the atmosphere there. The next paragraph, it says, although the concentration of ozone in the ozone layer is very small, it's vitally important to life because it absorbs biologically harmful ultraviolet UV radiation emitted from the sun. You notice in these articles how they use all these different words. Now, why did they say it absorbs biologically harmful UV rays? They themselves do not even realize what they just wrote in these things, Because all they think about is the sun. The sun is a light source and it emits light, and so therefore the photons come from the sun and they zigzag and they travel millions and millions and millions and millions of miles, and within 8 minutes, boom, they come down on Earth. Now, that's part of it, but they have no idea anything beyond that, But here we see these biologically harmful UV radiation emitted from the sun, because certain radiation, this is why Yahweh protects us with the outside atmosphere that we have. We need it to protect us from the sun, or we would burn up without it. And most of the ozone is found into the mid to high latitudes of the northern and southern hemisphere, and the highest levels are found in the spring, not summer, and the lowest are found in the autumn, not winter. And it's so amazing when you think about the way that the Earth is, tilted on 23 degrees, and it, and as it goes around, revolves, orbits around the sun, when it's closest to the sun, of course that's summer. When it's furthest away, that's winter, right? Huh? When the sun is closest, that's winter. When the sun is when the Earth is further away from the sun, that's summertime, because of the way that the Earth is tilted. Okay, now, and then not only that, the way that the moon is set up there. You see the moon, and you see the different phases of the moon. And the moon is on about like a 5-degree angle in its orbit, so that you can see it. Otherwise, it would be blocked out from your view and stuff. But it's just so amazing the way that Yahweh made all of these things. Now, most of the ozone, it says, is in its mid to high latitude of the northern and southern hemispheres. Okay. And it says well, let's just read it. Okay, not summer. It's found, the highest levels are found in the spring, not the summer, and the lowest in the autumn, not winter. During winter, the ozone layer actually increases in depth. The puzzle is explained by the prevailing stratospheric wind patterns known as the Brewer-Dobson circulation, which is while most of the ozone is indeed created over the tropics, the stratospheric circulation then supports it or transports it poleward and downward to the lower stratosphere of the high latitudes. Anybody got a book with you? The thing is here is and the scriptures refer to these things too, but you've got the wind currents, and it's so incredibly amazing what Yahweh has done with wind currents and with water currents, because, wind just doesn't blow in one direction. It blows in all kinds of directions. Here on the surface, it may be blowing to the south. Go up 10 feet, and it could be blowing to the east. Go up another 10 feet, it could be blowing to the west. It's all different ways, and it's the same with when you go into the water. These currents, these currents that go in all different directions, east, north, south, and west. But they're in different layers, And the way these things are set up, it's to keep the earth, of course, livable for mankind. And, without that, we would die, because you either get too hot or you get too cold. You have to have all of this, and it's just so amazing the way that Yahweh created all these things and put all this together. Now it says the Brewer-Dobson circulation in the ozone layer. The ozone layer is higher in altitude in the tropics and lower in altitude in the extratropics, especially in the polar regions. The altitude variation in ozone results from the slow circulation that lifts the ozone pore air out of this troposphere into the stratosphere, and as this air slowly rises in the tropics, ozone is produced by the overhead sun, which photolyzes oxygen molecules. Now, the stratosphere is from 9 to 28 miles. The troposphere goes up, I want to say something about 60-something miles high. I can't remember exactly. But notice that the sun photolyzes oxygen molecules, okay? So it's doing something with these oxygen molecules. Now, oxygen, it says, it gives a description here, a colorless, odorless, gaseous chemical element. It's essential to life processes and to combustion. One of these days, you're going to be able to give them the definition and tell them exactly what oxygen is. And then they'll know. All they can describe it as it's an odorless gas, okay? It's a chemical. It's a chemical, okay? And notice what they say, it's an odorless, gaseous chemical element, okay? And chemical, that means it's any substance used in or obtaining by a chemical process. I can't stand that when you look up a definition and it tells you a chemical now is any substance used in or obtained by a chemical process. Now, what definition is that? Huh? It doesn't even tell you what it is, okay? But actually, a chemical is any substance that's formed when two or more substances act upon one another, okay? Or that's used to produce a change in another substance. That's what Webster's dictionary gives a better definition. So you can see that these chemicals, remember the body and everything doesn't work on chemicals. They always say chemicals. It's not chemicals. It's electric. Okay, it's electricity and stuff that our bodies work on. Now, it talks about the molecules, how the sun, which photolyzes oxygen molecules. In other words, it changes this oxygen in the ozone and so forth. The molecule is the smallest particle of an element or compound that can exist in a free state and still retain the characteristics of the substance. In other words, it's the smallest thing that you can break down and actually have a component, part of that substance, and still be intact. When you break it down further, now you can start separating and change, and you can change it. Because a molecule is a combination of atoms together. And this is why it's described like water is H2O, right? Two atoms of hydrogen, one part of oxygen put together. But that's one molecule of water, So you can see how these things are broken down to a very minute level. Ozone depletion. Now, this was a big thing way back. Remember back in the 70s. You see here it says on the regulation that in 1978, Sweden became the first nation to ban CFC containing aerosol sprays that were thought to damage the ozone layer. Pastor writes, please notice that I underlined the word thought because this is only theory, and the thought was rejected by most countries. Since this date, there has been very little to add to this theory. And it's a theory. Somebody probably thought, hey, we can make some money here, because it's exactly what they drove them. Because if you remember back in this time, they got away from the CFC, okay, and they also began to get away from air conditioning, the Freon and stuff, because they said, oh, that's destroying the ozone layer, so we got to get rid of that. So what did they do? Well, the big major companies who produced this, they just came up with another substance to replace it, which of course costs more. And that's why this stuff is so high today, because it costs more to replace it with that. So the big companies made more money on it by being saviors of the environment. But it was all theories. They had no proof at all that this is what caused this. And it's not. It's man's sin that causes it, right? Just like cancer. Cancer is caused by sin. We know that. All sickness is caused by sin. Okay, the ozone. Ozone, or O3, is a triatomic molecule. Triatomic, of course, that means three atoms together to make the molecule, consisting of 3 oxygen atoms. So it's called O3. It's an allotrope of oxygen that is much less stable than the diatomic species O2. Get that? Species. I thought, wow, like I said, they don't realize what they're writing, these words that they're writing in here. They really don't understand this. O2 just to them just seems like this tiny little speck of something They don't know what, But it's a species. It's a micro kingdom, but they don't understand that. But in their own writings, they use these descriptive terms, but it just goes over their head. Ground level ozone is an air pollutant with harmful effects on the respiratory system of animals. But on the other hand, ozone in the upper atmosphere protects living organisms by preventing damaging ultraviolet light from reaching the Earth's surface. Okay, so if it comes down in different places, of course it can be harmful. It is present in low concentrations throughout the Earth's atmosphere. Ozone, along with reactive forms of oxygen, such as superoxide or singlet oxygen, hydrogen peroxide, and hypochlorite ions, is naturally produced by white blood cells and other biological systems such as the roots of marigolds. Okay? Now, that might be the reason why, certain plants in the garden, marigold does keep away certain pests in gardens, and you plant them in a certain way, and it actually prevents certain pests from coming into the garden and destroying certain plants. So we can see here that these things, even though they're made in the white blood cells, okay, however, they found that this can be damaging and so forth, and they go on with that. But let's look under this underlined here. It said, moreover, it's believed that the powerful oxidizing properties of ozone may be a contributing factor of inflammation. The cause and effect relationship of how the ozone is created in the body and what it does is still under consideration and is still subject to various interpretations, since other body chemical processes can trigger some of the same reactions. So they're admitting that they do not know what the cause and effect here is. They don't understand these things, although you find that these ozone can be created in the body, okay, by the white blood cells. But how it reacts against the body and what it does to the body is still an investigation, as they said. They really don't know these things. Now, all of these are things that you're going to learn one day. We're going to understand these things. We're going to know all this and be able to whip this stuff off the top of our head, and know these things, because you need to know it to go out to protect some other planet somewhere and actually bring it back into the beauty that Yahweh originally created all these things. That's good. He says, well, one thought he says I want to place in your mind is that what man calls ozone depletion up to this point does not come from exhaust pipes of cars. You just saw in these past few articles found in this protective layer that surrounds the earth are the same things that Yahweh put in the earth itself. Okay? But man always has to kind of try and come up with some kind of thing to explain why something is wrong with something, or try and figure out. This is why, they have these grants and stuff, and they give them millions of dollars to sit down and figure out something that you would think, why in the world do they need to study that, But let's study this little snail. It's a rare snail. We need to find out all about its life. And it's been years, trying to figure out all this stuff, and they can write a book about this little snail. Meanwhile, mankind is destroying itself, but nobody cares. No one would take the time to think about, why can't we study what will bring us together in unity, and solve these problems. Instead, we're going to worry about this little snail over here, But it just shows that all things deserves respect for life. But the thing is, it just shows where their minds go off somewhere else rather than where it should be focused, where Yahweh says, love your neighbor as yourself. If you love your neighbor as yourself, the snail will be taken care of. But because mankind doesn't do that, that's why we have extinct species that's no longer with us. And those species that are extinct is another reason why the earth is in the shape it's in now, because you need everything that Yahweh originally created here on earth. And one day all that's going to be restored. So he says, if we could at this point dismiss Charles Darwin's theory and start looking at this very needful protective shield as being designed for this purpose, it would be relatively easy to understand the truth about this protective shield and what mankind is doing to destroy it. For this reason, you must get some facts in your mind which must be presented in this article first. You must understand the facts about viruses, where they live and how they're made and what they do. Bacteria and viruses showing the ability to be transmitted through aerosols are considered to be airborne. Viruses such as human influenza viruses are transmittable through aerosols. Okay, so the theory, here's an article, the theory behind airborne transmission. Before the theory is explained, the phenomenon will first be presented. Everyone has felt the cool ocean breeze on their face before. But did they know that the ocean breeze contains more ocean bacteria in its few aerosols, water particles than in 1 cubic millimeter of ocean water? In other words, you could take 1 cubic meter of ocean water and you have more bacteria in that breeze than what you find in that 1 cubic meter. So when air moves rapidly above the... I like the way this article is written because it's really descriptive. Got a lot of color to it. When air moves rapidly above a water surface, some particles aerosolize and are carried into the air. Okay, it might seem by chance that some particles are not and not others are carried, but this is not the case, and the phenomena of surface tension plays a role. The surface tension, of course, talk about the surface tension of the water, okay? Because water in itself is an astounding substance, you know, and there's so many different forms of water that mankind doesn't even know about yet. But water forms fairly strong bonds within itself due to the hydrogen bonding, okay? Because the way the hydrogen molecules are made, the atoms are together and they're at, I think it's 105 degrees or something like that, that the oxygen is off-centered from the hydrogen atom. And what that does is, the way it's made, it allows the other atoms to come and be able to combine together and to form the molecules and stuff. And this is what causes a water droplet, and this is what holds the water together, okay? However, when something gets in the way of water molecules and disturbs the lattice that they form, the lattice, you know, a lattice, like you see a lattice network, okay, that's how all these little molecules, I mean, all the atoms are joined together, and then the molecules connect together and so forth, and they bind with one another. And if you could look under the microscope, that's under a very highly powerful scope, you would see that this is the way it is. It kind of looks like a lattice network of them being tied together. However, when something gets in, because what they do is they join with one another, you know. However, when something gets in the way of water molecules and disturbs the lattice that they form, water can no longer make strong bonds with each other, and water molecules can be separated more easily. In the case of an ocean breeze, when wind passes above ocean water, it picks up portions of water with the weakest bonds, which are most easily aerosolized. Okay? The thing is, you've got this strong bond that's holding, but this is the water tension stuff. And when the wind blows, those weak bonds, the ones that are not bound real strong, that's the molecules that would be picked up into the air and blown into the air. And that's why when you walk along the beach, you know, you feel that breeze coming, it's moist with the air. That's what he's talking about here that's taking place. Bacteria has surface proteins that are charged and attract water molecules, okay, that act as particles that distribute the lattice of water molecules. Notice, bacteria have surface proteins that are charged. Okay, this is the electric part. That are charged, and they attract water molecules. They act as particles that disturb the lattice of water molecules, so places on the surface where bacteria reside have weakened water molecule bonds, and so the wind picks them up and they spread in your face. Okay? Places where the bacteria on the surface of the water mixed in with the water, their bond is weaker, so it's more easy to be picked up when the wind blows and is carried off. This brings us to the requirements of airborne virus or bacterium. There must be charged proteins present on the surface that will lower surface tension of water, allowing aerosolization of the particles. Okay? So there's a charge that goes on it, and water is charged and stuff, and you have positive and negative charges and stuff in the water itself. And they know and done studies that when you can apply light sources and stuff to it, you can actually come up with a different type of water and so forth. But here we see one of the many problems affecting the protective shield. Keep this information in mind as we proceed to finding out why this protective shield is failing and what we see coming because of this failure. Now, in a report released on Monday, it says the former generals warned that weak governments could fall following increasing water and food shortages caused by global warming. This would pull U.S. troops into such flashpoints at a point of the humanitarian missions as a part of humanitarian missions to those regions. They added that the melting or Arctic ice would lead to seawater becoming less salty and thereby affecting the workings of sonar used by American submarines in the sea. This report was published by CAN Corporation, a Virginia-based think tank. Now you notice the military concerns is about their war machinery. They could care less that the ice is melting. That don't mean nothing to them, except the fact that we won't be able to sneak up on somebody with our submarines. We won't be able to detect the enemy coming at us. They're always thinking about military, instead of thinking about the fact that the Arctic ice is melting. To them, it's just, it's crazy. President Bush has rejected appeals from various quarters to take a tough stand against rising global temperatures and has refused to join an international community group to curb rising greenhouse gas emissions. Curbing greenhouse gas emissions, yeah. The thing is, they're looking in all the wrong places because they don't understand what they're even looking for. If they did, they would have the answer. But remember, the secret things belong to Yahweh and not to man. Higher temperatures over the coming decades are expected to cause more smoggy days and heat waves. Higher temperatures over the overcoming decades are expected to cause more soggy days and heat waves. Keep your radio tuned to HOI 90. Contributing to a greater number of illnesses and deaths in the United States. Now, see, they know that. They don't know why, but they know it's caused, Some heat waves characterized by stagnant masses of warm air and consecutive nights with high minimum temperatures intensify in the United States and Canada. Now, you see, there's something there because there's severe heat waves, okay? And then you have stagnant, the air stays, it becomes stagnant and it becomes, hot and sometimes as muggy as can be and stuff, and sometimes it's just like stale air, there's no air movement, and the air just becomes like that. Well, all of these things have a reason, because sin is affecting these things and causing these things, because it's not normal to have the tremendous heat wave that would destroy people and kill people, It's because of man's sin. They're messing around with the atmosphere. They're messing around with the microbes and mutating them to where they can't do their job. Then he goes on and he says, warmer temperatures lead to greater concentration of ground levels ozone, which forms on hot, sunny days when pollution, cars, and other sources mix. Smog can damage lung tissue, increasing respiratory and heart disease and death. So all of those things are just a big cause of the problem that they're causing. Now, this next article says food and waterborne disease. It is said a rise in salmonella has linked to higher temperatures, and studies in Canada, Europe, and Australia have shown a correlation between rising temperature and cases of salmonella, she said. Unless we do better about food handling practices and other factors that lead to salmonella, rising temperature would lead to more cases. So these things are breaking out, and you can see by how the earth and the air works together. When one is affected, the other is affected. If something is caused in one of them, then it's going to affect the other one. Now, in this next article, it says, notice carefully what is found in the air is also found in our soil. Please remember what you see in this article, because worse things are coming. Study finds the air rich with bacteria. Okay, rich with bacteria. It says, want biodiversity? Look no further than the air around you. It could be teeming with more than 1,800 types of bacteria. You just breathed it in the breath you just took. Now that's just, that's a drop in a bucket of what Yahweh has made. But this is what Yahweh has allowed mankind to see, 1,800 different types of bacteria in the air that we breathe, you know. Now, that's just part of what he's allowed mankind to be, actually to see these things. According to the first of its kind census of airborne microbes recently conducted by scientists from the U.S. Department of Energy's Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. Of course, another government, right? Another part of government. Government's always going to be involved in these things because this is mankind trying to figure out. And you'll see what they're trying to do here. Okay, the team used an innovative DNA test to catalog the bacteria in air samples taken from Texas cities of San Antonio and Austin. Notice, what did they use? DNA tests. Okay, because these bacteria and stuff in there have DNA. They're living beings. They have DNA. Okay, they found a widely varied bacterial population that rivals the diversity found in soil. I kind of find that hard to believe because I doubt that one rivals the other because they're both so packed with stuff that you can. I mean, when you teaspoon of soil has, 25,000 bacteria in 1 teaspoon of soil, you know, and it's like and you got that up in the air too, but they just haven't found it yet. They also found naturally occurring relatives of microbes that could be used in bioterrorist attacks. Now, see, that's what they're concerned about is the bioterrorist attacks. Okay, they're not concerned about the fact that the air is getting dirty and filthy, you know, and can kill people. They're just worried about these bioterrorist attacks. Before this study, no one had a sense of the diversity of the microbes in the air. Okay, the research, which will be published this week in an online early edition of Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, serves 2 purposes. It paves the way for a regional bacterial census that will help the Department of Homeland Security bioterrorism surveillance program differentiate between normal and suspicious fluctuations in airborne pathogens. It will also help scientists establish a baseline of airborne microbes which they can use to track how climate change affects bacterial populations. We want to determine the background levels of airborne pathogens and other microbes because only very limited work has been conducted on cataloging organisms in the air. You know, again, they use these words, organisms in the air. They don't know. This is going to be on your test, by the way. Okay, when the kingdom comes, you're going to be taking tests, right? I mean, you're going to be learning, you're going to be getting out the books. Yahweh's going to be teaching us all these different things of how many millions and billions of these things are, you know, floating around all over the place, and we'll have the understanding of what they're used for, because you'll have to understand what they're used for. You see, and this is why the law comes into play, because certain bacterium can do certain things. They can't do other things. Certain viruses will do one thing and certain other things. But all of these microbes can do certain things, and they're trained and they were created to do certain things and not others. So if you don't know what you're doing and you force certain bacteria to do one thing when they're not supposed to, and some other bacterium is supposed to do it, then of course you're going to cause confusion. You see how you're going to cause Babylon in the kingdom? It's just going to cause confusion. So you're going to have to learn these things and know what to do. And you will be able to do it because you'll have your subconscious mind. And all this is important to be making us into the image of Yahweh. Oh, okay. So they talk about Austin and San Antonio, how they did these tests. Jump down to the bottom of the page. The team also, the last paragraph, second to last, the team also determined that location was not as strong a source of microbial variation as time and weather. Okay. Specifically, the time of the year during the 17-week testing period was the most significant source of variation, followed by atmospheric conditions. For example, warmer and drier conditions lead to increased amounts of spore-forming bacteria. This information may help explain temporal spikes, which is important in bioterror surveillance. Okay, again, they're always tying it in with the military, A spike may not be due to biological attack, but to normal weather fluctuations that draw bacteria up from the natural reservoir. In this way, bacterial synthesis can help us explain whether a pathogen's presence is natural or it's an indicative of a biological attack. Then he says in the next paragraph, almost all of the bacterial bioterrapathogens are in the environment and in the air naturally. So we need to find their natural backgrounds, okay? So if you notice, because that's what man does, he takes things that's on earth and he mutates it to where it can destroy someone. Now there are things out there right now to where you could take a pin and dip the tip with something you couldn't even see and stick it on someone's skin, it would kill them instantly. That's what mankind has done, is taken something that Yahweh made, mutated it, changed it to where it will bring forth death. And so this is why we're going to have to change our hearts and minds. This is why Isaiah says, remember Isaiah 2:2 and Micaiah 4, they will no longer learn war. Okay? What Jacob said, what causes war among you? Because of the lust and envy within you and so forth. So the hatred for mankind. They'll have to learn the laws of Yahweh to be able to learn what it means to love your neighbor as yourself, and then there will be no more war. And all these types of things that they come up with will be gone. They will be done away with. An airborne biological census will also enable scientists to track how climate change impacts the microbial composition of the atmosphere. This process is already occurring. Windblown dust and biomass from Africa's expanding Sahara Desert are reaching North America in significant quantities. Now, and remember too, now, in the tropics, the rainforest, okay, the rainforest is what's responsible for making the majority of the oxygen, along with the plankton that's in the ocean, which actually produces half of the oxygen that we breathe. But the Sahara Desert, when the winds blow, it blows up hundreds and thousands of tons, and it actually forms clouds that they've seen from space, by looking down with the satellites and so forth. They see that it's just clouds of dust that actually crosses over the oceans and then falls into the rainforest. And then now the rainforest takes that dust that's there, and it pulls the nitrogen out of it, and it actually helps it to stay green and so forth. So the earth helps itself in that manner. It's just one of the amazing ways that Yahweh has made his creation. The next article here is Microbe Census Reveals Air Crawling with Bacteria. The air is a hostile place for a microbe, often dry, lacking in nutrients, and filled with deadly ultraviolet radiation. The atmosphere would seem to be the last place a microbe would want to find itself. Yet a new genetic census of air samples from Austin and San Antonio, Texas, finds that as many as 2,000 different kinds of microbes may be present in the air we breathe on any given day. Now breathe in. Get all of that 2,000 microbes right into your body. Right? We used to think of air. I mean, you think of air. Usually when people think of air, they breathe in oxygen. The majority, 78% to 80%, is nitrogen. Oxygen is only about 20% of what you breathe in. You mostly breathe in nitrogen, and then you got very small amounts of different other things as neon and helium and argon gases and stuff. But these are in the hundreds of percentages that make up the rest of the small amount. So you mostly breathe in nitrogen. So he says, microbial ecologist Gary Anderson of Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and his colleagues collected air samples to detect specific genetic information, to search for a gene involved in the making of a protein 16S, write that down in your book, that'd be on the test. 16S that is found in many microbes. In the air samples, the researchers uncovered at least 1,800 different types of microbes, including such as the diarrhea-causing Acrobacter and ulcer-inducing Heliobacter genera that can be dangerous to humans, okay, to human health. So you see here that these microbes, certain microbes, as I said, you're not going to want to mix certain ones, okay, because they're going to cause you trouble, okay. So previous efforts to determine microbe counts in the atmosphere had relied on culturing the air to see what grew. You know, they'd have to get an air sample, and then they would culture it in the laboratory, which is, you know, they would allow put them in petri dishes and things like this, and allow the bacteria to grow, and then they could check it. Well, they have different ways where they can do it now. Where they can put the traps up in the plane, and when they fly through the clouds, it pulls it all in there. And then when they get down on the ground, they just pull the trap out, and they got everything there, and they can study it. But over 90%, he says, notice what he says, over 90% you can't recover, even though it was not only present, but viable. Anderson notes, he says, it's just something about the physiological state it gets in. When it's not in rich media, it has a different way that it functions, okay? A different way that it functions. This is what physiological and physiology, I can't even talk tonight. Physiology, okay, has a different physiology, and that simply means the way that it works, okay? It has a different way that it works if it's not, like it says, in the rich medium. So if it's not in the, I mean, think about it, okay? Because if these things are not in their natural environment where they're supposed to be, where they can really thrive and do their job and do their work, then of course they're going to be acting differently and stuff. And so he says you can't recover some of these things because of the fact that they don't really know how much is actually in there. They've only found a certain amount, and it has astounded them so far as to what they see, because they're constantly discovering more and more and more stuff. This puts the diversity of microbes in the air on par with the diversity of microbes in the soil. The reason why is because of the fact that when the wind blows, of course, the microbes in the soil will be lifted up into the air, right? They will mix. In fact, there's a large crossover between the microbes in the air of a city and the microbes in its soil. A large crossover, because, now, see, this shows the fact, this proves exactly what the House of Yahweh teaches by the fact that these microbes mutate, you know. When they come from the air, from the ground, because the ground has been defiled, now they're reaching up into the heavens because as the wind blows, it picks them up in the dust and the dirt and brings them up into the air. And the air currents, this is why they found so much stuff in the way up in the upper atmospheres, because the fact that the wind currents will take it, and it keeps taking it to a higher and higher and higher and higher level. It's the same as when a drop of water falls, you know, and begins to freeze. Well, the wind would take it up and whip it up, and then it starts coating with more water, and it freezes and drops down because it gets heavy, and then the wind will blow it back up, and it coat with more ice, and it gets heavy, and it starts falling down. Eventually, by the time the snowflake makes it down to the earth, it's built into what it is. But it started off as a very tiny little speck of a microbe. And that's what acted as the nucleus, and then all the ice began to form, or the water began to form around it, and the ice formed, and then it gets heavy enough to drop down to the earth. The ecologists found that airborne microbes were broadly the same in Austin and San Antonio as well. It's interesting the fact that they did this study here in Texas too, you know. The most common microbes included those that thrive in hayfields and deteriorating exterior paint, according to the paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, USA. We were surprised at how many different types of sequences we were seeing, okay, the sequences, you know, the different facts that there can be so many different families and so many different kingdoms of these microbes, and how one can stem to another and be related to another one and to another and so forth. Obscured phyla like TM7, which have been seen in soil and gum tissue, hot springs type organisms and microbes from sewage treatment plants. All of these things were found up there. Remember, even on the space station, okay, they found feces, bacteria up there. The census provides a background for ongoing efforts by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security to monitor city air for potential bioterrorist attacks, as well as, see, this is another way by which the earth is helping the woman, because the military likes to get involved in all this. They're saying we got to find out about biological attacks. But really what they're doing is Yahweh's allowing mankind to have a certain amount of knowledge and gather certain things like this. And the only reason why is because Yisrayl Hawkins brought it out years ago. And so Yahweh's allowing man to discover these things so they can say, hey, look what we found. Well, guess what? The house of Yahweh already taught you these things years ago. You're just now discovering what Yahweh's already shown to his house, So it just proves that Yahweh is real and Yahweh is true. It says, for example, storms of Sahara dust and their attendant microbes have been linked to local meningitis outbreaks and tracked across the Pacific to coral deaths and an increase in childhood asthma in the Caribbean. So you can see how all these microbes and stuff are picked up in the air, and it can be traveled all the way across the world, all the way across the globe to the other side in different places. It's important to do a microbial census to see what's in the air we breathe. I believe it's going to change as the climate changes, Anderson says. We may see very different populations of microbes in the air that may have some health implications. And that's exactly right. And that's exactly what we see taking place, very different. Notice he says, we may see very different populations of microbes. Why is it going to be different? Because it's not what Yahweh originally made. It's the sin that's causing these mutations to cause this stuff to change. And so now you have these different population of micro kingdoms living in a place where they're not supposed to be living. Okay? And everything, you remember, Yahweh made all these things when he made the earth. He made mankind. He made the animals. He made the vegetable kingdom. He made everything after its own what? Kind. Okay? And so they're supposed to stay a certain way. You're not supposed to mix the two. Well, they've done this with the microscopic world, which really causes a lot of problem because that's what everything is made of, is these tiny microscopic things, okay? And by creating this confusion in the minds of these things, in their lives, and disrupting their lives, this is why Romans 8 says that everything is looking for us to redeem them. We've got to stop here. Okay. We're going to stop here on page 50, and the Kahan can take off the bottom of page 50.